Well, Tim Walz is the perfect salesman for the Democrats' anti-white policies, or at least that's what an article says on theblaze.com. So here to discuss this with us is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze Media. Chris Bedford in studio. He is Blaze Media's senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent. And special guest, we have Liz Wheeler, host of Blaze TV's Liz Wheeler Show. So Liz, let's start with you because this campaign strategy is pretty insane, right? Like when we look at it and we see Tim Walz being added and all of the talk about him. So what is campaign strategy like right now for Harris bringing in Tim Walz as the VP?
Sure. Hi, Jill. Hello, gentlemen. It's pretty insane, actually, if you analyze exactly why Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz, because there was a new election model prediction from The Economist a day or two ago that said that Pennsylvania has the highest chance of being the state that decides the outcome of this election. I think it has a 24% chance of being the deciding vote. And Kamala Harris had the opportunity to pick the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, to be her running mate. And had she done that, she would have obviously increased her chances of winning Pennsylvania because the voters in Pennsylvania like Josh Shapiro enough that they voted him into the governor's mansion. She chose not to pick Josh Shapiro because he's Jewish, because she instead kowtowed to this anti-Semitic, radical anti-Semitic wing of the Democratic Party, you know, the guys that are all outside of the DNC right now, the ones that look like a foreign army and not like protesters. Instead, Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz. Why? My producer, and I have to give him credit for this because I didn't come up with this line, although it's the best line that I've heard in a long time. Tim Walz is the first white man to ever have benefited as a DEI hire in the United States of America. He was picked solely because he is radical enough in his policies that Kamala Harris understands a fellow communist, recognizes one when she sees one, but also because it is an essentially racially motivated effort to portray Tim Walz as your kind of doofy Midwestern white dad in hopes that white people in the Midwest, where Kamala Harris needs to win votes if she wants to win the presidency, in hopes that these people will look at him and be like, oh, hey, he looks like me. I guess I'll vote for Kamala Harris.
So this is fascinating because the word that comes to mind is self-hating, right? I mean, if you're anti-white, I mean, the article is saying Jeremy is very good at these spicy takes. He has a whole book on the subject. It's very interesting. People should check out. But the claim here is that he's anti-white. Well, he is white. So that means he's self-hating in some way, or at least he pretends to hate himself or his heritage in order to garner votes. I find that fascinating. I mean, I think people pick up on that. But what do you think?
Yeah, his politics certainly are anti-white. There's no doubt about that. I mean, if you support DEI in any circumstance in this country, whether it's governmentally, whether it's at the corporate level, whether it's in small businesses, it doesn't matter. If you support the left's definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that requires you to discriminate against white people and particularly against white men. Tim Walz has been a huge proponent of DEI, so that in and of itself, those policies are certainly anti-white. I mean, every one of his policies is essentially, I would deem it more anti-humanity. If you think about his policies on abortion, especially in his own state of Minnesota, his policies on abortion, he allows it up until the moment of birth and even after birth. There are something like 5 or 6 babies born every year in his state that have survived botched abortions. And instead of giving them life-saving care, hospitals, doctors, nurses, because of Tim Walz's legislation that he signed into law, are leaving these babies to die on hospital tables. It's sickening. It is as sickening as it sounds. And you go from everything to his cozying up to the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, the guy's gone to China like 24 times for what? He goes there because his ideology is shared with these communists in China who we don't even need to go through the litany of all the human rights abuses that communism in China has inflicted on their people, from brutal one-child policies, forced abortions, to a lack of free speech, to, you know, their social credit score, to the outright abuse in the essentially concentration camps for the Uyghur Muslims. It's to hunting down dissenters all around the world, including in the United States, forcing them to spy for the Chinese Communist Party. That's what Tim Walz supports. He supports the same things that Kamala Harris supports. He supports Marxism in the United States in the form of critical race theory. He is a supporter of the transgender ideology, which is both a neo-Marxist ideology intended to turn the next generation of young people in our country into avowed Marxist revolutionaries. But it's also harmful to the children themselves in the physical way and the mental way, like making his state a haven. What did he call it? A safe space or a sanctuary state for transgender children. And I say that with quotations because there are no such thing as transgender children. It's children who have been abused into thinking or into having some kind of gender ideology, identifying with some gender ideology, and they can go to the state against the wishes of their parents and obtain puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and genital mutilation surgery. Tim Walz is a nasty, nasty person. But I guess going back to your original proposition here, or your original premise, I would dub him as anti-humanity.
So where does it go from here? Because these two candidates here are not a blank canvas. Now, you compare them to Barack Obama, who in 2000 reportedly had trouble getting couldn't even get onto the floor of the convention. 2004 kind of made his debut. By 2008 was accepting the nomination. He was someone that people were able to put their hopes and dreams onto. And he was someone who we were reminded again last night, despite having the most radical administration in 80 years, at least in the United States, was able to push through. We've spoken the language of Reagan, spoken the language of moderation. You listen to that guy and you think, I kind of agree with that. This is an uplifting vision. That seems so different from both Kamala Harris, the most liberal Democrat senator before she became the vice president of this administration, and Walz. I mean, does this rhetoric actually echo outside of those halls in the DNC, or would they need to moderate? It's a strange tact for a general election.
It is. I mean, let's be very clear about Barack Obama. He himself is not moderate in any way, shape, or form. He's not a centrist in any way, shape, or form. He is a brilliant and entertaining liar. We know that because you can compare what he has said to what he has done, his record as president, and he is the most radical president. Maybe Joe Biden was a more radical president. It kind of seems weird to even call Joe Biden the president because he's obviously not the one that's running his own White House here. But Barack Obama is the one that ushered in this era of radicalism. I think Kamala Harris and Tim Walz could never get away with being as openly radical as they are admitting that they are, except for the mainstream media is running interference for them. The mainstream media has spent the last 8 years portraying Trump and everyone associated with Trump, including anybody who voted for Trump or supported Trump or thinks that a tweet of Trump's is funny, as being extremists, as being terrorists, as being genocidal. I mean, what do they call Trump? They call him literally Hitler, a dictator, an authoritarian, a threat to democracy. So when you have that as what the mainstream media is painting Trump and Trump supporters to be, and you contrast that with even a very radical leftist like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, then the mainstream media can more easily say, well, sure, but would you rather have Trump or would you rather have Kamala Harris with, her smile and Tim Walz with his kind of doofy dad look? They're able to, the mainstream media at least, is able to moderate the perception of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in a way that it's very hard to combat, actually, if you're Trump.
Last night was the Obama night at the DNC. Let's start with Michelle Obama. She had some words to say about the GOP.
Of a brighter day. The chance to vanquish the demons of fear, division, and hate that have consumed us and continue pursuing the unfinished promise of this great nation.
So much joy there, Liz. So much joy emanating there from Michelle Obama.
She calling us demons? I couldn't even really tell. It was like a word salad, sort of.
Well, I think that's actually important to understand when you have Kamala Harris out there, and Michelle Obama was lending her gravitas, if you will, to Kamala on this night. And she's going out there and orating and making sure that everybody knows that Kamala Harris is my girl.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle Obama, it's the rebranding of Michelle Obama is actually a case study in the power of the mainstream media. If you think about when Barack Obama came on the scene, not even in 2004, but when he came on the scene in 2007 as the presumptive nominee, Michelle Obama was viewed as a liability to him because there was that video of her saying that this is the first time she's ever been proud to be an American. And back in 2007 or 2008, patriotism was very strong in our country. It hadn't been fully desecrated by the left. And so they took Michelle Obama actually out of the campaign circuit a little bit, off of air, and tried to just have Obama, who has a very friendly demeanor and he's a very good speaker and liar, as we just noted. And Michelle Obama has been completely remade because Hollywood decided that she should, and the mainstream media decided that she should be. She went on tour. She wrote her book. She's now, I think Democrats actually probably would have preferred Michelle Obama to be the nominee versus Kamala Harris. And I'm glad she's not, because I think that the rebranding of Michelle Obama has been incredibly effective. She's one of the most liked political figures in our entire country now, which is mind-boggling given, her own record and her own statements on this country and her own radical positions. But Kamala Harris, in a sense, should be grateful for that endorsement. But man, it just calls to mind every time you hear something, that kind of phraseology, calling us demons. it just makes you understand how that attempted assassination of Trump happened. This is what the left has been doing. They've been looking at you and I. We just want to homeschool our children and grow our own food and live in peace and defend our families and worship our God and be proud of our country and teach our children to live free. And they are looking at us, and they're not only calling us weirdos, but they're looking at us and they're calling us now actual demons. This is the reason that the attempted assassination of President Trump was able to happen, because what do you expect people to do? How do you expect people to react when you're told that what you're facing is actually Satan?